Hello and welcome to episode 455. I am really excited today because I have a special guest with me. His name is Steve Robertson, and he is the CEO of Julian Krinsky Camps and Programs. This is an organization specializing in youth to adult programming that turns curiosity into passion and skill. Doesn't that sound amazing? Steve worked with youth from around the globe for almost 20 years, and he's also a generational expert specializing in Gen Z, millennials, and the new Alpha Gen. His primary responsibility is to provide cutting-edge, high-caliber academic curricula for 20-plus summer programs. And so, Steve, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's a joy to be there. And that was a mouthful. You did really well. I feel honored to meet myself after that introduction. That is awesome.
Yes, I feel honored to meet you as well. So before we hit record, we were chatting a little bit about Gen Z and how there seems to be a lot of fear that parents have that kind of swirls around between social media and peer pressure, and they're online too much. And so many parents come to me just riddled with fear and worry about their child. So you have a little bit of a different take on that, don't you?
Well, certainly. And there's a lot of fear out there. And in some ways, it's justified. It's a tough world out there. It's crazy. But Gen Z are aliens, right? And so whether parents realize it or not, we have aliens among us. And part of the journey is just to understand that they're aliens. And I say that somewhat jokingly in the sense that they've grown up so different to any other generation that they can't be like we are or like we expect them to be. And so we look at them as aliens. And once I think parents get a sense that they're aliens and there's a different lens that they view them through, well, that changes everything. And so part of what we see with this beautiful generation of aliens is they are so innovative and creative. They have the ability from the beginning to take technology, internet, screen time, and use this technology as a tool. And what they're able to do with this as a tool is spectacular. And so navigating that for parents and even for employers, that's an interesting journey because the generations before that had technology, let's talk about millennials, they used it as a toy. Gen Z and Alpha certainly have only used it as a tool. So they've always grown up in this space of using it collaboratively, creatively, and we're starting to see how amazing that is in so many ways. And certainly in the programs that we offer, which is outside of school, but yet academic curriculum in many ways, just seeing how amazing this generation is when you put them in the right environment and you add the right things to the soil, they just blossom. I mean, it's spectacular. And getting rid of fear is a really important part of that, because when we're in fear, we certainly aren't able to leverage or call this generation into the kind of destiny I believe that there really is for them.
That is such a great way of looking at it. I absolutely love that. And I think you're really spot on, because I think kids today they're able to tap into their creativity in a much easier way than I think we probably were when we were young. Sure, I hear a lot of parents talk about, well, when I was young, we stayed out until the street lights came on. We didn't sit in front of the TV. We were playing stickball and hide and seek and all this stuff, climbing trees, whatever. And yes, that is undeniably a wonderful thing, being out in nature, the fresh air, all that stuff. And then playing games where you have to figure out the rules and who gets to go first and what's fair, and when there's a dispute, trying to work it out. There were many opportunities for us to learn all of those kind of life skills.
Right.
But I don't think it's any better or worse than what kids today are experiencing. It's just a different format, and their format is more technological and more digital, but it still offers endless creativity and collaboration, like you said.
Yeah, and so one of the things we always say around here is it's not good or bad, it just is. And
Mhm.
the just is part has got to do with life changing. And certainly every generation before was like when we were young, and there's a lot of legacy value to the when we were young conversations, there's no doubt about it. But truthfully, the landscape is really different. And so usually when we have this conversation, I talk to parents about the perfect storm that has created this generation. And the perfect storm really has, I guess, four components, technology being a massive one, and how technology has impacted all of our lives. Most of us don't even realize to what extent yet. And then the second one is the news, just knowing what's going on around the world 24/7 at any given time. And there's the premise of mean world. There's a syndrome called mean world syndrome, which was in about the 70s. They were doing research on television, watching, watching television and seeing violent things on television, and that made people fearful of the world. Well, today you multiply that by 10 because of all the screens and everything that's out there. And yet, according to the data, we're living in the safest, healthiest, wealthiest time in recorded human history, yet we feel very unsafe. So the second thing is kind of world news and the way that's portrayed. Certainly social media is the third part, which has both positive and negatives. There's a lot to be said for both sides. Obviously, we focus heavily on the positive because it's not going to go away. So what does it help setting up camp in the negative space? But it's important to be aware of it. And then the fourth thing is parenting, just the way people are engaging with their kids. And those four things have created this generation. And to understand that perfect storm puts you in a position to realize yesterday may have been amazing. Tomorrow is also going to be amazing. And part of the journey we as parents play in that conversation is so important. We were talking about this yesterday, about how we're now in an economy of influencers. And we had one work with us last summer, a spectacular young lady from Brazil, 5.6 million followers on Instagram, 2 million followers on YouTube, and explaining to parents that truthfully, at the end of the day, influence is what this conversation is about. If you aren't in a position to truly influence your kids, this is not manipulate, right? This is influence your kids. And if you don't understand the value of influencing your kids, you're going to miss the opportunity to influence them well. And that void is already being filled by influences, and not all the influences are good, right? So when I was just recently overseas and I was speaking, and I was actually in Monte Carlo in Monaco, and in the group there were about 15, 20 Gen Zs there, and I asked them, how many influencers do you follow? And they follow at least 10 to 12. And I was showing parents that if you don't choose to influence your children well, the influencers are there to influence them. So it's not a case of, well, if I don't step up, it's a case of somebody else has already stepped up. Somebody else is already influencing them. And so winning that back, I think that space back starts by just understanding this generation is different and not trying to put everything of our generations on them. You know, the same clothes don't fit. And so stop trying to make it fit and try and look at what's positive. And as I've said already, there's just such a lot of, when you look at the space we live in today, knowledge is no longer what's important because knowledge is ubiquitous. You can find anything you want to online, anything. So knowledge isn't the issue, it's what you do with that knowledge. And that's why this generation, or one of the reasons why they're so creative, because they have access to all knowledge. And now it's just a case of, well, what should I do with that? And you're seeing that expression so beautifully in so many ways. And then you add the layer of technology and the ability to do all these cool things, and have it displayed 24/7 around the world. It creates this real, very creative, entertaining environment where we all live, and parents have to understand that in some ways they're competing with that.
I love the concept of being an influencer in your child's life. That's such a modern concept, and I love it because you're absolutely right. We live in an influencer culture, and if we don't participate in it, our kids definitely participate in it. So looking at it and asking yourself the question, do I want to be an influencer in my child's life? I think just frames it exactly in a modern context.
Yeah, we have, that conversation goes so deep. It starts really with, some data talking about this generation having a really short attention span. 8 second is what they call it. And as we've spent so much time with this generation, we realize it's truly not an 8 second attention span, but it's an 8 second filter. So the amount of content that we're all asked to consume on a daily basis, if you don't filter it, there's no ways that your head can contain all this information. And so Gen Z have grown up filtering from day one. The other generations, believe it or not, are learning to filter as we go, because life is just so big. And the filtering leads to something that we call the curated stream, or curation. And so the curated stream, really, it talks about what people with Gen Z allow into their life. And what they're currently allowing in is influences. And as a parent, you'll always be in that curated stream to some degree. The question is just to what degree. So because you qualified as a parent, you are somewhat of an influencer. The older they get, that influence may wane. And so while you have young children, the opportunity to start to really influence them well helps sustain the time that you can be an influencer in their life. And every day that you have the ability to influence your child well is a day well spent. Every single day, regardless of their age. And so getting into their curated stream is what we talk a lot about, is how do you do that as a parent? How do you get into your own child's curated stream? Once they get past the idea of having to do that, once they realize that they have to qualify to speak into their own kids' lives and to some degree, then you start to see them engaging in a way that's more creative, in a way that is customized, because every child is different, right? So what one child enjoys, how you engage them, the other one may not the same. And so parents are starting to figure that out. And it's so amazing to not only see Gen Z and Alpha generation blossom, but once parents get a sense of what this is about, they are impacted in the same way, because it stirs up such joy in them and such an accomplishment. I make it sound like an accolade. I don't mean it like that, but it's just such an accomplishment when you're able to influence your kids well and you see the fruits of that. That in itself is such a motivator. So as soon as parents realize what they've got to do and they start doing it and they see some of the fruits of that labor, it's amazing. It's amazing.
That's terrific. I really love that. And it makes me think of the way you're describing it. It really makes me think of the feed of a social media account. And, if you think about Instagram, if you open a person's Instagram on their phone and you just go to the Explore tab, it it gives you things that are relevant to the things you're interacting with.
Right.
So if you follow, race car accounts or something, and you interact with and like and comment on that stuff, when you go to the Explore feed, you're going to see more posts about race cars.
Right.
So I've heard someone I listened to, I learned from, say, if you want to learn about someone, go to their Instagram feed. That's going to tell you more about them than anything else, because it's going to show you what their interests are.
I love
And
that. Sorry, I
yeah,
didn't.
I just think it's really, I mean, that's actually true, that you can learn what they're into by looking at that Explore feed,
Yeah.
because your Explore feed will be different than mine. It's very, very tailored to what we're interested in. And so the concept of the parent being an influencer in their child's life to a greater or lesser extent, but then also that concept of filtering out the information. This generation had to become very quickly
Yeah.
good at filtering information. So we want to try to make sure that we as parents are one of those things they filter and let in, not keep
Yep.
out.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it's funny when we have these conversations with parents, it goes really well until we get to the social media space. And
Mhm.
you just touched on it. And part of it is the fear of getting involved in some of these apps that they don't know and or just not unknown territory. But what you also just touched on was really valuable, is that I really encourage parents to be involved with social media, even if it's one or two of the apps. Even if you're not engaging with apps like kids would or teenagers would, it is one of the most powerful listening tools you can have. It teaches you what this generation values. It teaches you what your kids value. Just like you said, when you look at that explore component and you get a sense of what their stream is about, you get a sense of what they value. You get a sense of how they communicate. It's an amazing tool to learn. You said you listen to someone who you learn from. parents, if they understand the power that social media has, even just to use as a tool to teach themselves and to learn and to get a sense of what's truly going on with this generation, I think it's a really powerful thing to do. If you truly want to get into your child's curated stream and influence them well, which everybody I think really does, it's now when you start taking those steps, at some point you get to a place where you have to start engaging with technology, because technology is the place where Gen Z and Alpha live. They've never not lived in that space, and it's not going backwards. 35% of the communication currently is digital. And so when you understand that 1 in 3 words is a digital word, not literally, but in that context, you understand that you have to, as an older generation, start to embrace this world differently. A great example is autonomous cars. Oh, I'll never go in one of those. Yes, you will. Yes, you absolutely will. And it'll
You
be
will.
something you think. But when you take it down to their kids, they feel like, for the most part, I'm going to do what I did. I'm going to do what my parents did because those things worked. And while some of those things will still work for a long time, you have to augment some of that with what's current today. And so the way to learn is to learn. As a parent, you're not done with the process. You have to keep learning if you really want to influence well. It's easy to just let them be because they'll probably turn out okay. But we're not in the business, and I'm certainly not my desire is not for my kids to turn out okay. I want to inspire and influence them well. And part of what that requires of me is deliberate effort in figuring out who they are and what their world's about and how to be relevant in their world, so that I'm not seen as a dinosaur that can't bring anything relevant to the conversation. And once that happens, the opportunity to bring in legacy things, things that I really value from when I was growing up. Now I have a platform to do that because I've qualified somewhat to speak into my own kids' lives. And it's a journey that takes a bit of deliberate, hard work, but boy, it's worth it. I mean, think about how we all think about our kids. And I think parents just don't know what steps to take. And so giving them some steps, get a sense of this generation and how truly different they are, that they are aliens. Once you get that, without being offended by that term, because it's just a joke, to give you a sense of what's going on, um, then you look at them differently. And when you look at them differently, you think of different ways to engage with them and figure out who they are and what they value. And that's where the journey begins, just one small step at a time. And if we can just inspire one parent to do that, it's worth it, right?
Absolutely. You know, as you're talking about it, I was thinking about the different ways I've tried to connect with my boys over the years. I find it much easier to connect with my daughter. She and I are very wired very similar, so I don't find it perplexing to connect with her. But the boys, I definitely have to pay attention and be more conscious. It's not as just routine or easy.
Right.
But I remember when Fortnite was first coming out several years ago, and I sat down, it had probably been a few weeks when it was kind of on fire and everybody was playing it. And I sat down one night and I said, I want to learn how to play. Why don't you guys teach me? And unbeknownst to me, my daughter videotaped, she was behind me and my son videotaping us with him trying to teach me how to play Fortnite. And she showed me the video. I never knew it for years. She showed me the video a week or two ago, and I watched this video and I was at once astonished and cracking up
Right.
because I'm like this helpless. I might as well have had two left hands trying
Right.
to or play with my feet, I was so bad and I was trying and I'm like, oh, it won't go, it won't go. I'm trying to turn right, but it won't go. It's just going straight, whatever. And my son is going, you're not pressing the right button. You got to press it like that. What are you doing? You have to let go. And I
Right.
said, I'm trying, I'm trying. And the video was hilarious because I was just an abysmal flop at Fortnite.
Right.
But it was so fun watching my child be the expert. Then I was the fumbling student.
Right.
And and how often do we allow ourselves or create opportunities where we can switch the roles like that, where we don't know what we're talking about and they do, and they're teaching us.
I love so much what you're saying. That's a perfect scenario. Usually, kids are not excited about teaching their parents anything. And so there's that that dilemma of you being the learner not doing a good job and them being the expert trying to teach you. But what was beautiful is your daughter videoed that, and so that is the perfect
Beautiful.
scenario, because not only does she share that and all of a sudden her friends are looking at you in a different way, but it gives her something funny to share. And it's funny how um, kids, teenagers are very excited about the opportunities to show their parents in a funny situation, because it's always like, oh, my parents, right? And it's okay to play into that, because again, if you're part of the conversation, if you're, it just is so powerful. If you're part of that whole journey, if you're the mom or the dad who picks the kids up and drops them off from the movies into the movies and lets the music be loud in the car and listens to the conversation, if you're, those things matter. They really
They
make a
matter
difference.
so much.
And the fact that you were okay to try and learn Fortnite, wonderful. I don't know how long your son would put up with teaching you, but it doesn't matter. You see,
No.
that's the whole point. And I love that you went there. Um, it's interesting that your daughter took so long to show you the video, which is, my kids would have showed me immediately and posted it everywhere online so that everybody could see it. But that's part of being curated in. You see, as soon as you're valuable enough to spend time around, even if they're making jokes and fun around you, if you're a serious personality, it doesn't matter if you're serious or funny, there's ways to make sure that what you bring into the conversation is, I'm going to call it Instagram worthy, because we live in an Instagram world, right? So I think about deliberate ways to do something Instagram worthy, just for the sake of being relevant to my kids' lives. The other night, so my kids are a little older, I'm not sure how old yours are, but I have a son and a daughter. And my daughter, they both graduated college already. My daughter just graduated, and they're at my house, our house with her boyfriend, and they show us this like TikTok balancing thing where the two of them do this whole balancing thing. Well, they can't do it. So Colleen and I, my wife and I, go and we get it done. They happen to video us. It's posted online and it's shared everywhere, because here's mom and dad that were able to do something that they weren't, and it was funny, right? And so any opportunities like that, it just creates a moment with your kids. And at the end of the day, they live in a world where we go from experience to experience, bite-sized experience to bite-sized experience. We're not looking at years of, that's not what they live like. And so if you can be a part of that, just being part of one of those experiences in their day, you start to build such equity. And that equity is so, so valuable, because it's not just an influencer online. It's somebody who's invested in their lives as well. And again, influencing them well, not trying to manipulate or live their lives for them, because that is really dangerous too. But it is just such a powerful tool, because it isn't about, here I am, do what I say. It's about, we're living life together. We joke. Actually, we don't joke. We talk about the sage on stage, meaning the mom or the dad with all the knowledge, the professor at the front of the class. That is dead. It no longer exists, because I don't need you for any information. But what is so powerful is the guide by the side, the mom or the dad or the leader that figures out how to come alongside you, and even in a way that is invisible, guide you, encourage you, walk with you on a process that is making you the person you're going to be tomorrow. That is future-proofing you. You touched on some of the social skills. There's a number of those social skills when you unpack the data that are tremendously uh, uh, in demand, shall we say, for Gen Z, that they haven't practiced as much as in other generations. And so when parents get what those are, and they can invisibly help them figure those things out without making it a curriculum, without making it sit down at the table, I'm going to tell you something now, you start to really future-proof your kids. And more now than ever, we need to future-proof our kids. Doctors, if you're graduating high school today and you want to be a doctor, you still have maybe 7 to 10 to 12 years of education ahead of you. By the time you graduate, you probably won't have a job. Doctors and lawyers, I don't think are going to last another 10 years. Who knows? That's a prediction. There's already artificial intelligence that can do a whole lot of that space. So the future is so unknown and so unpredictable right now. We're living really in the wild west, a changing of an era. And future-proofing our kids is our task, because we don't really know how to prepare them for tomorrow. That truly nobody knows what it's going to look like. So giving them those skills, showing them how to build relationships, showing them how to communicate, because the world still has multiple generations in it. So you have to be able to communicate cross-generational. Gen Z have figured out how to speak to each other, but there's other generations. And then, that ability to bring some of the legacy value in as you start to future-proof plan, give them skills that we know are going to be really valuable tomorrow. And some of those are, the problem-solving space, the communication space. There's a couple of those that we've identified that are really big areas where, a whole lot of coaching and training really needs to be done. And it doesn't happen at school because it's not part of a regular day-to-day school environment. So it has to happen outside of that environment where parents have something to say about it.
Yes. I was thinking about a friend of mine. Her son is a big gamer,
Yeah,
esports.
love it.
And last year, and she's doing it again this year, she told me she was taking him to a gaming conference in Orlando for the weekend.
Right.
And I thought, that is phenomenal. This friend of mine could care less about video games. It's not her thing. She didn't grow up doing it. She's not doing it now. She sat with him to learn what he does and all that stuff and, understand his world. But I think the statement that she made to her son in validating what his interests are by getting on a plane with him and taking him to this conference that costs money and spending the weekend there, that's such a huge statement to her son
Yeah.
about how much she values him and his interests.
I mean, that's just so amazing on so many levels. Gen Z has grown up so on demand and so siloed and so CEOs of their own life from day one that they have grown up in somewhat of a bubble, individually speaking. And while older generations want them to respect Gen Z, to respect the older generations and listen to the older generations, the shift that's happened is once you do exactly what she's done, you start to understand their world and take the time to really know them. Then you get to a place in their lives, in their journeys, in their hearts, where you can start to share the value that you have. That qualification is so important. They don't understand yet as a generation how much they need what it is that we have to give. Therefore, it's our responsibility to get them to that place. And one of the ways to get them to that place is take the time to get to know them and their worlds. Growing up, our parents were the ones that kids must be seen, not heard, that whole kind of thing, and you'll fit into our role. And it's truly switched. And so for some people, that's a difficult thing. You're my child, do what I say, listen. And while I'm not here to correct a parent in terms of how they want to do that, what we've just seen is that when you take the time to do that, your ability to understand them better is incredible. But not only that, there comes a time where the switch happens, where they certainly value who you are and what you can bring to that conversation. Their eyes are somewhat opened. Once our eyes have been opened, there's a phase that you go through and their eyes are opened to everything that we can bring to the conversation. So I love what she was doing. I love that she's part of that journey. And certainly esports is a raging debate. We have an esports program. And parents are like, I'm not going to let my son, daughter sit and play games all day. But there's so much more to it. There really is. And while life needs to be balanced, on screen and off screen certainly needs to be balanced, there's so many skills that these gamers learn. They're communicating with each other. They have to be on time. They have to conflict resolutionize. I made that word up. Do conflict resolution all the time as they go. And so there's so much to it. And the technology is also put us in a place where the skills they learn in gaming are the skills that industry is looking for tomorrow.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right. And so parents don't get it yet. Here's what's good. Get them out of the basement on their own and get them into a program where a bunch of people come to my camp, where a bunch of people are sitting next to each other. Go to Orlando. That's fine. So again, it's two sides of a coin, right? So there's one side that can be really dark, but the other side is just amazing. If you look at what the positives are on that, and there's balance, and as a parent, you help make sure that there's balance, there's just such an upside to learning this way. There really is.
It's so true. It's so true. And yes, I think I agree. I believe that once they added headphones and the ability to communicate inside of a game, it really blew the doors off of the potential inside of this gaming world. I know that when I think back to Fortnite, my kids are moved on from it for the most part. But when it was all the rage, and literally all three of my kids were playing it, all three of them, but they were playing it in in concert with their friends. So they would get together with 3 or 4 friends inside of the game, and they would have their headphones on, and I would hear them, and they would be like, "Oh, you have to go over here. Oh, cover me because,
Right.
so and so's coming," or what have you. But then sometimes it would be, "Why did you do that? Why
Yeah.
did you take that down? You ruined my cover." And then they have to argue and fight their way and figure out their conflict. And then they have to compromise on how they're going to do it differently. And then sometimes one kid made their own, I forget what it's called, where it's their own server,
Right.
and they invite people into their world, but
Yeah.
then they're inviting these 6 people, but they're pushing that one out, and he's
Right.
not invited. There's all kinds of the normal in-person social dynamics going on in those headphones.
Absolutely.
And so, if parents can kind of just look at it like, well, before I have a hairpin trigger reaction and fear and all kinds of stuff coming up and the dangers of social media, which nobody's arguing about that.
Right.
But if we can just kind of pause before we go getting all worked up about that and say, let me just sit down and learn about it. Let me
Yeah.
watch my child. Let me listen. Let me see what they're doing. Let me try it myself. We'll
Yeah.
play together. I want to see what this world of theirs looks like. When you spend the time to really get to know it, it's got a whole other interesting side to it that you don't hear about on mainstream media, because
Definitely.
mainstream media wants to make us fearful, and their intention is to get ratings, so they're going to tell you all the terrible stuff so that you tune in for the next horrible announcement about how social media is ruining your child, but they're not giving you all the benefits.
Well, social media is, as we said, a two-sided coin. Um, it's powerful on a number of levels. It's currently a resume. Um,
Yes.
More than 70% of businesses look at your social media as part of the application process, and that's just the ones that admit it. We do 100%. If you're working for us, 100% of us are we're gonna look at 100% of your the people who apply, because it tells an amazing story about who you are. So that realization that this tool is actually a part of your resume is really, really important. It's also an amazing communication tool. It's an amazing connecting tool. You just spoke about these headphones and playing together. Well, now they play with people from all over the world.
Hmm.
Those barriers, the peer group pressure that everybody knows about, is now something completely different, because it is now an international peer group that has no boundaries. And in this case, it can be really positive, and I love and celebrate that. And then, you have to think about the fact that social media is so prevalent. Um, Understanding how creative kids can be in that space is part of their journey. It really is. You cannot live a life without being in that space. Businesses understand that, and that's why marketing is pushing so well through there. That's where the data comes from. That's where they live. Now, tomorrow they may migrate somewhere else, but while they're still in that space, it's critical for parents to understand. And trying to unplug and make your child be the one that isn't, while certainly something could be said for that. I think the two sides of the coin, the other side of the coin is talking about being an outcast or peer pressure. If you're the only one who doesn't or hasn't, I think it behooves us as parents to spend the time to teach our kids how to navigate those spaces and situations well, as opposed to leaving them to figure it out and then blaming social media because it didn't go well. And so I think that's part of the call for parents to come back in a form, to be involved more than they have been potentially, because where they are right now, kids need that. They really need that help, that guidance.
It's so, so, so true what you're saying. I was thinking about, my daughter was following this makeup artist, James Charles, on YouTube.
Okay.
And occasionally I would, pop over and watch her videos with her, and she would tell me, and he was part of the sister squad, and this girl and these other 2 brothers, and then a whole dramatic thing blew up.
You're back.
Okay, it's still recording. Yeah, I don't know what happened. A whole dramatic thing blew up, and then this other YouTube influencer makeup person had a beef with him, and then they split, and then he was losing followers, and then some of the fallout made him split with the other three. So now that whole thing is blown up. But I remember, and he's probably about 19 years old, I think. And uh, did I lose you?
So good.
Okay, are you there?
Yep.
So I don't know what part you heard, like the whole thing blew up.
Yep. No, I got you.
Okay. And he's about 19 years old. And so each day for the 2 weeks or so, it was a really hot button topic. I would say, well, what's the latest and what are the follower counts and what's happening to him and who's talking to who and who's not talking to who. And she would keep updating me because in her world, this was a big deal.
Right.
And it gave me the opportunity to say, look, and she was trying to figure out, do I side with this one? Do I side with that one? Do I think that one's right? That one's wrong? And I said, look, he's just a 19-year-old kid. He might have millions of followers on YouTube, but he's just trying to figure it out too. He made mistakes. He maybe said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing. Now he's paying a huge price, and he's doing it in a public way. And
Yeah.
so it opened up this beautiful conversation about just because he's an influencer and he's, well,
There we go. You're back.
yeah, I'm back. My Wi-Fi is acting up today. But just because he's known across the world doesn't make him a perfect human being.
Yeah.
And he's still figuring it out. And unfortunately for him, we get to watch him stumble through life and figure it out.
What you said is so valuable, Erin. The realization that there's a survey, and they ask the top 10 roles, jobs that you want. The number one is a YouTube influencer, 38%, something like that. But the reality, so a job that never existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, now is a full-on job. And that 19-year-old is working really, really hard. But the interesting thing is, and you said it really well, is he is, Gen Z is, Alpha generation, they are in a phase of always becoming. They actually are trying to figure out who they are. And part of what this journey that they're on is, and why it's so different from ours, we became, and then we became again, and we became again. They never arrive. There is always an update. There is always a new. There is always a better, a faster. They have never had that feeling of, oh, we have a television. I remember when we got a telephone in our house. It was ridiculous. I'd come home after school, open the door, no telephone. Next day, oh, there it is. We have a telephone in the house. Now you laugh. I'm not that old, but I'm from South Africa, and so it took a while there, right?
Yeah.
And so then we had a telephone for a long time before we had a cell phone. We had a television for a long time before we even had choice of channels. Their life is always becoming, and it's really unsettling. So when you look at them, you can understand why they're on this journey trying to figure out who they are is what takes up a lot of their time and energy. Just who am I and where do I fit into this place? And so when they're siloed and isolated in so many ways, you can understand because they're just trying to figure out who am I, where do I fit in, what do I do? And that journey is faster and slower for some and for others, but it's a journey that other generations haven't had in the same way. And so I love the fact that they can explore themselves, they can explore life, but in this day and age, that sometimes means you're doing it in front of millions of people, and the consequences are grave. I think Will Smith said something. He said he loved the fact that he was young and stupid before the internet because none of that was recorded, and so today it's all recorded, and so it's causing people to be very mindful about many of their actions.
Yes. So I think the takeaways that parents can get out of our conversation today are to sit down and enter their child's world and learn about it and watch them interact in that world and see actually with fresh eyes what's happening rather than preconceived notions about what it must be like.
Yeah, I love any conversation that stirs a parent to be more deliberate about how they try to influence their kids well. And if you're creative in trying to influence them, you're going to fit right into the world we live in now, which is a very creative world. Um, and yeah, that's inspiring, because any day that you influence your children well is a better day. They come out better after that day than they went into that day. And that's so powerful and so valuable. And I know that while Gen Z, Alpha Gen may not understand or know that they want or need it, once you do it well, you see how they really blossom. And that's really, the inspiration for us.
Yes, that's so beautiful. So, a couple of little pieces of business before we wrap up here. You are going to be speaking at our Revolutionizing Parenthood conference at the end of April. So, can you share with my listeners a little bit about what you're going to be sharing with them at the event?
So part of what I'm hoping to share is a little bit more about the perfect storm, trying to explain and show them with data why this generation are aliens, and also trying to be really practical about some of the things around screen time, the pros and the cons, and even the role a parent can play, with some real tangible takeaways of these are things that you can do to get into your child's curated stream. So there's a range of those topics that we've covered today that I try and unpack in a little bit more detail, just to give people some insight and hopefully inspire them just to pursue their kids differently. And that's my heart. I want to inspire people just to look at a different approach. The same approach is fine, but if there is another approach that's better, wouldn't you be interested? And that's what I'm going to try and share with them. There are some other approaches that I believe yield greater results in terms of influencing your children well. And so sharing that data helps break down some walls. So it's not a judgment against how you parent. It's a case of, this is the data about this generation. And so a different set of tools needs to be brought to this task. And I'm hoping to share a few of those tools with the people that are there.
Sounds so exciting, and I believe that the people who attend your workshop are going to walk away feeling empowered, feeling inspired, feeling equipped with some new ideas or tools, and hopefully just a little less afraid of parenting this amazing generation.
I would absolutely hope so. Thank you.
So I hope that my listeners will decide to join us at Revolutionizing Parenthood, and the link will be in the show notes. But if they want to learn more about your camps and the various things that you offer, because I know you have a ton of different things for kids, where can they find out more information?
JKCP is the website, jkcp.com. It tells you about all the different programming we do. So much of what we spoke about today, we have built into even an invisible curriculum. The kids don't know that we're busy delivering. But by the same token, they get the opportunity to be with students from 140 different countries and all the states. And so that blend is just spectacular. While they're doing some things that are really interesting and exciting. And so we have a whole range, everything from sport to some really cool academics, and some fun programming as well. So yeah, please hop on there and have a look. And obviously we'd love you to join us in one of our programs around the country. And if you are going to be joining us at the conference, I would certainly love you to come to the talk that I'm going to be giving and meet you in person. I would certainly enjoy that too.
It's going to be fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for spending this time with me, and hopefully lightening the stress and worry level of my listeners.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice chatting with you.
That wraps up today's episode. Wherever you are in this world, I hope that you make it a very inspiring day.